Do you want to lead us off, Chris?
Sure, why not? My name is Chris. I've been basically a game master, dungeon master for about 6 months total time. I'm currently running Star Wars D20, um, and I have run Dungeons and Dragons 4th Edition, 10 Candles, some other various niche type of tabletop games, and yeah, I'm based out of Nanaimo, and you can check out any of my social media stuff that would be on the overlay, as far as I know. Correct?
Excellent. Absolutely.
Nice. I guess I'm Rob, also known as Talisman, as you can see down below. I stream here on Twitch sometimes. I was a GM for Crit and Fumble. I've been GMing for too long, as they like to put it. They claim I've been GMing since I've been in diapers. I actually disagree, but you know. Aside from that, I play pretty much every system. Currently working on 5th edition Shadowrun, and one of my own making that I'm kind of tweaking.
I'm Craig. I stream my games right here on Twitch. You can find me here. I've been gaming since 1981, which makes me super duper old. But hey, it's my passion. I love it. So tonight what we're going to do is we are going to give a bit of an introduction to everybody who is on the stream. What we'd like to do is basically talk about how long you've been gaming, what you game, favorite campaigns, all of that kind of good stuff. And then I think after that, what we'll do is we'll kind of exchange some information about, why is this great? Like, what do you think, etc. Would anybody like to lead off that charge?
Rob spoke first. He gets to go first.
Damn it!
Excellent.
Right. Help me out here. Where was I starting with all this?
Okay, how long have you been gaming?
That would have been like that's
Since
basically
diapers.
what I've been told. I'd say my first game was probably about middle school. Didn't start GMing until high school, and been GMing since. So, 15 plus years of experience.
Okay, awesome, cool. And so what'd you start with?
Started with 3rd edition D&D, and kind of branched out from there. I don't know, it was good, but I enjoy where storytelling's gone since then, where it's more focused on the storytelling than the mechanics. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. How many? And do you play regularly?
Yeah. So we do there's a podcast which we record every Sunday that we can make it, and then I have a couple online games I run.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Do you use Roll20?
Roll20 or Map Tools. Roll20 is a very useful tool for streaming and for getting people in there, but it's so weak in the back end for mapping and doing fun things like lighting. So Map Tools is a better program for that.
I found that I've tried to convert to Map Tools, but what happens is I know so much of how Roll20 works that I have a heck of a time converting my skill set.
I think the biggest problem with Roll20 is it's super friendly for the players, which I love, but it likes to kick you while you're down as a GM. You try and do anything, you're like, I gotta do this 4 times, and then maybe it'll work out. So.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the stuff is super manual, right? So, favorite campaign?
Or
campaigns.
2. That's tough. I don't do modules anymore. I used to do them way back in the day, but now it's all freeform. So I guess I'm enjoying Crit and Fumble in our current 2nd season. I'm not GMing in that, so I'm liking that. That's like the first in a long time.
Right.
I don't know.
Do you get to play very often?
Very rarely. The curse of a GM, really.
It is. And I think after you've GM for a while, a lot of players are maybe a little intimidated to actually GM you.
I think so, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So there are the 3 sets of, you have the narrativist, the simulationist, and the gamist. Where would you fall into those categories?
I would say I'd probably be a mix between narration and gaming. Heavier on the narration,
okay.
For sure. Yeah, I like that. I like the dialogue is huge for me. I love player-to-character dialogues.
Cool. Okay, Chris, how long? So you've been 6 months.
Well, 6 months tabletop gaming. Lifetime long video game player. A lot of my inspiration for tabletop games comes from my video game background. So I love tactical turn-based strategy games, Fire Emblem, chess, pretty much anything that requires logic to solve puzzles. I love that stuff.
What was the first game you played?
First video game or tabletop game?
Tabletop game
would probably be 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. I was the game master for that. I was super nervous my first game. I had 7 players for my first session, and then second session I had 10 players, so that was fun and challenging. I used some interesting I call it phase combat. Essentially, all the players will take their turn, and they can take their turn in any order they want, and then all of the NPC and enemy players will take their turn. And then I kind of adjusted things accordingly, so they didn't just like wipe them all out in like their first turn. Um, I felt that would be a little bit easier for them to juggle, and I didn't have to worry too much about initiative tracking and stuff like that, because I can get to be a pain when you have lots of players.
So I have just recently gone to a no initiative system where everybody declares at the same time, and then everybody rolls dice at the same time, and it's super chaotic but awesome. So, so you played Fourth Edition. What else have you played?
I'm also currently playing Star Wars D20. So that's kind of like a 3.5 edition reskin from what I've heard. I've never played 3.5 edition, so I don't know 100% for sure. But it's pretty cool. I'm currently running the Dawn of Defiance campaign module series. We're on episode 4 of 10, the Echoes of the Jedi. So I'm pretty excited. The players are encountering their first Sith Lord, so they're having lots of fun.
Okay, so all the players out there, first and only Sith Lord. I guarantee you there are no more Sith Lords, right?
Well,
Don't spoil your own campaign, man.
we don't. I've actually
Nice,
made
man.
my own sort of deck of many things for Star Wars, since they didn't seem to have one, so I made one from scratch, and they got to draw a couple of cards. So I modify that every now and then when they want to play with it. So they might end up getting all of the Sith Lords. Who knows?
Wow.
Oh, lovely. So tell me, what's your favorite campaign you've played in?
So far I've only game mastered. I haven't played in any, but I would definitely say the Keep on the Shadowfell for 4th edition. Levels 1 through 3 pretty much is how it goes, but it's really fun. Probably my favorite NPC character that I roleplayed was Splug. He was a little goblin that the party rescued, and he sounds kind of like Gollum, but like really messed up. So that's one of my favorite characters so far.
So, narrativist, simulationist, gamist. What are you?
I do like to kind of probably mix all three of them a little bit together. When it comes to combat, I like them to like be as simulated as possible. So like if you're gonna do like a strike to the head, it better lop it off, or if you miss, your sword's swinging off somewhere else, kind of deal. But I like them to try to describe it narratively. If they can't, then I will, kind of thing. And yeah, I guess gamist. I'm not 100% sure on the definition of that, but I would say probably just a mix of everything.
So, narrativist is the guy who tells the stories, right? Simulationist is the guy who tries to make things as realistic as possible. And then gamist is the guy who is, it's all about the game, getting better stuff, becoming more powerful, all of those, like the mechanics and the minutiae.
So, yeah, I would say
of the game.
definitely a mix of all that. I do like to narrate some stuff. I like the combat to be as realistic as possible. And, if they're doing something goofy like a front flip over somebody and trying to slash their head off at the same time, and they fail their acrobatics check, that, they could break their neck if they land on their head. And always more magical items, as many as possible. Get them super overpowered. It's so much fun.
So you and I run the exact opposite game.
Sounds like it.
So I've been playing since 1981. I started with first edition Dungeons and Dragons, so way back in the day. But since then, I've done Traveler, RuneQuest, Roll, whatever. If it's been there, I've probably played it. So I've been playing now. That's 38 years, which is a long time. And in that time, I have sat down to actually play as a player 33 times, less than once per year. And I find I miss, like, I really enjoy sitting down as a player. But this weird thing happens to me as a GM. As soon as I sit down as a player, I'm like, oh, do you know what would make this better? and it's unfair. It's totally unfair. But I think what happens is you kind of get into the habit of it, right?
Really.
As soon as you start...
Once you start storytelling,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can't really listen to somebody else's story. Not the same way, anyways.
No, I agree with that. I think it's really difficult. I've had two favorite campaigns. I had a campaign run in TSR setting of Birthright, which ran for the better part of about 4 years. And the characters began as one of the characters was the son of the Baron, and eventually his sister inherited the barony, and there was all this political intrigue and monsters roaming the land. It was a lot of fun. And then now I'm actually running a game right now, the Merrilee, which is a traveler game, which I've been running for the last 4 years as well. And it really feels like they've just finally hit their stride. Like there's been all these adventures, but then every time I ask my players, are we good? Do you want to play some more? They're like, oh yeah, and I'm like, oh good, because I got all these great ideas for the campaign. I'm strongly narrativist. To me, it's mostly important the stories that you tell. Like it's not so important, that you're fighting monsters. It's important why you're fighting the monsters. That you have a really good reason for getting in there and mixing it up. But I used to be dyed-in-the-wool simulationist. Oh no, you were hit on the upper left of your shoulder, and it tore this muscle, and this armor is ruined, and
You can only carry 14.5
and I
pounds
look
in your left arm now.
That's right, exactly. And I don't know, like when I look back at myself, I go, I'm not exactly sure at what point I stopped thinking that and started thinking, no, I just want to tell a story. But I'm glad I did. So
I think there's a point in every GM's life where they want to pick themselves up by the collar, just slap themselves upside the head and go, "What were
Yeah.
you thinking?"
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about biggest GMing mistakes. What's the biggest screw up you've ever
That's
done?
easy. Mass combat for sure. Anytime you try and do a war simulation,
Oh.
it's just like, why did I even start this? It's just a drudgery of dice rolling. And yeah, I've learned from my mistakes many times over.
Chris?
Worst mistake. Probably would have to be shutting one player down when they were attempting to do something to progress the narrative. However, what they were doing, to be completely honest, was probably extremely silly, and it was frustrating everybody else at the table. Looking back, I was like, there's probably a better way for me to go about doing that instead of just completely shutting them down and then maybe redirecting. But, brand new GM didn't really know what necessarily to do in that situation, so did what I could, and then I apologized later for it. So everybody was okay afterwards.
I think for me, my biggest mistake is sometimes I give my characters too much rope. Like what'll happen is sometimes I want them to come to the conclusion or to solve the mystery by themselves or to do those things. Of course, they don't have the full story that you have in your head. And so sometimes they flail. And I got to tell you, one of my weaknesses is sometimes I can let my players fail for just way too long. And then you kind of get this trough in your game, right? And you're trying to get out of it without necessarily sort of handing them the answer. Like you want them to solve it. Yeah, and and I have a lot of trouble jamming my way out of those things.
I was just gonna say I had a bit of advice one year about doing something similar, and I was just told, take the first good idea your players swing at you and roll with it. And it's just like, you know what, the amount of puzzles that has solved and made, like, it's like, okay, you didn't solve it the way I wanted to, the cipher didn't work, but you're not spending an hour or two at the table trying to go through the riddle to get the exact right phrase to get through the door. It's like at some point it's just like, it's not worth that struggle. It's like,
that is brilliant advice. The first clever thing the players come up with, that's the answer. I totally like
gets the narrative moving and gets you out of your own head. Because otherwise you sit there and like, but this is the answer. It should be this, and that's it. And you get stuck in that idea. And you're like, you know what? They came up with a half a dozen decent answers that could have been right. Why didn't I just pick one? Why am I making them struggle still?
Yeah.
It's like,
That's actually quite brilliant. I really like that. I'm going to steal that from you. It's interesting because I've just started a game with my kids, right? So they're not diehard gamers. However, what occurred was, while we were playing, they came up with this. So like I was describing the story to them, and I kind of gave them some backstory, and they're like, "Oh my word, this guy is the villain!" And I'm like, "That's brilliant! Oh man, I'm totally going to use that." So yeah, but yeah, that's good. I like that, and I think that's part of too about the player agency, right? Because that. First off, I guess it would make the player feel super smart for figuring it out. Yeah, okay,
there's no
cool,
real downside.
Cool.
It's like, I haven't yet to come across one that's been a downside, other than maybe my own ego being smashed by like going, I made this epic puzzle and no one's figured it out, and But aside from that, it's like,
Yeah.
it's not worth it.
So, what's your number one rule at the table? When you sit down at the table, what's your objective?
Number one rule at the table: get rid of those cell phones. But
Yeah.
aside from that, uh,
Yeah. Absolutely.
that's a tough one. I don't really have a strong rule as far as what I want to come out of my players. Just to have fun, really. That's the biggest thing. Enjoy the story. Enjoy
Right.
the time there.
Yeah. What about you, Chris?
Well, we all typically use our phones for our stuff, so can't be put phones down. My number one rule probably is going to be, try to make it as fun as possible. I have a few players who don't engage a lot, so I kind of pick on them with like bringing them out of their comfort zone when it comes to role playing. So, for example, one of my players, who shall remain nameless for now, he's playing kind of like a bounty hunter character in our Star Wars game, and typically he just likes to keep to himself. He only likes to do the combat stuff and like shoot stuff. But recently he was brought into performing like Annie basically throughout the galaxy, and he's like the first person ever to promote the musical Annie. So now he's a traveling social media persona kind of person, and it really kind of forces him to be like, now I gotta worry about how everybody views me in the universe. So I have to be nice to people and stuff. And I'm like, you don't have to, but you post a selfie with your bounty every time you're gonna go kill one. So you got to make it kind of funny.
I think for me, my number one rule is the rule of cool. Like, I really want my characters to feel like they barely survived, but they kicked ass. It's like we did something heroic, and we did it for a good reason. Like, we didn't. It wasn't just that we defeated this guy, but it wasn't that we defeated this fighter, but we defeated this guy who was a slaver, and we've made a change in the world. Like, I want them to feel effective within the world, not just in their own party, but as world changers. Our second topic tonight is the topic of rules versus, like, how flexible are you on the rules? Are the rules there to be broken, or are they there to tell you how the game is run?
That really depends on the system, doesn't it? But I would say, in general, the rules are there to be followed by the players. The GM, while you have that side of things, you're also the narration of the story, and you're meant to bend the rules. So it's kind of hard to say you have to follow the rules when your entire role is to bend them to make reality happen the way it fits.
That's a pretty progressive statement. You're there to bend the rules.
Yeah.
All right. So what happens when the player says, "But according to the book, this is how that works."
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
because the thing is, they don't know what's behind the GM screen as far as what's being rolled for whatever purpose. I use the dice a lot of times as a GM to adjudicate how things should play out, whether they have a hit, a miss, but I don't look at anything too precise, because when it comes down to it, I'd rather an epic finish in that battle rather than, the big bad guy rolled a nat 1 and now just tumbled into a cliff down a pile of things into lava and is gone forever. Don't worry about him. Like, I like that epic moment where they get that finishing blow. They get in there and have fun. So I generally focus on their action and, let them embrace their failures, let them embrace their successes, and that's kind of where my attention lies.
Yeah. Cool. Chris, how about you?
I tend to probably improvise a lot more than I go by rules by the book. Star Wars D20 has like flat-footed reflex defense or whatever, and I just kind of throw that out the window because I'm like, why are we reducing their ability to do something when they have like 3 extra points to do it? So I just kind of I modify some of the rules in the sense of like, yeah, we're just not going to use that, or we're going to use this instead. In Star Wars D20, they have the optional thing of using a destiny point. So a destiny point, basically, it's kind of like a heroic action, but anybody can use one on any turn that they have, and it allows them to like dive in front of another player and take damage or nullify damage for moves. So I'm constantly trying to get them to expend as many of those as possible so that we can kind of move the narration forward in the story.
I'm curious if you've looked at the Star Wars role-playing game, like Edge of the Empire and that. There's 3 different editions based on the timeline. Have you looked at the rule set for that at all?
Briefly, there's so many intricate mechanics with the Star Wars thing that
Yeah,
I have so
I'm
much
mixed
to
because
go through.
it has a really cool symbol dice system, but I hate symbol dice because it takes forever to read the dice at the table.
Yeah.
But the
Yes.
thing I love about it is the way they handle initiative. Everybody rolls initiative, the GM tracks it, but then it's in anybody's order. So the one player's like, I want to cast a spell. He's like, has the most agency. What happens? They can take that top player slot. That's fine. Just you kind of roll to get a general order
Yeah.
of who goes when. Likewise, your big bad guy rolls a nat one on his initiative. You're like, crap, now he's going last and everybody's going to focus fire him. Or I can swap him with this mook up here and put him first so he gets to do something beforehand. And it gives a bit more control for narration, which I like.
Yeah, kind of what I end up doing in those situations is I'll just have like reinforcements come out. Like I said, I like to do phase combat, so like the players usually will get to act first unless they are being surprised or ambushed. Then like the in that case enemy would attack first, but typically they're attacking first and then the enemies will go. But if they've wiped out half of my enemies, then I'll just be like, oh, reinforcements have arrived, and
Copy paste.
yeah, pretty much. It's just like here's like 10 more stormtroopers, whatever, right? And
Yeah.
they're like, oh crap, let's do grenade diplomacy. We'll just throw our grenades at them until they all blow up or something. And like, I mean, it works for them, but it's always fun giving the big bad evil guys like extra abilities that they typically don't have. So like I'll get the monster block and I'll be like, yeah, he's too weak. Let's buff him up a little bit more because I got like 10 players that are going to attack him. Let's make him like 3 times more powerful.
For myself, the rules are sort of the guideline where you start, right? This is basically sort of how the world works together. There are 2 situations where I really struggle with rules, hard and fast rules. When you have an anticlimactic situation and there's no drama in the situation, and because the players have either rolled so well, or because or that's generally the reason. That's probably number one reason. And so there's no drama. And so sometimes, when the players are on like this, on this roll streak where they're just going crazy, that's okay, right? Because you're kind of like, okay, yeah, you guys are just on a roll tonight. Yeah, you smoked these guys, like it's. But other times, like you have a climactic scene and, it's like, okay, what do you got? Oh, I crit, and oh, that's your 3rd crit in a roll. Okay, at those points, that's when I kind of start playing with the rules a little bit in order to still make it a little. It's like, oh man, you're lucky you got a crit because these guys actually have this special ability, whatever, right? Not all the time, but sometimes. But to add drama to the game, so the characters feel like they've earned their wins. Because the problem is I haven't played very much, so I don't really understand what it's like to feel like it's easy. Like if you roll really well and you walk over the bad guys, is that still a good feeling as a player? I don't know.
I think it's a delicate
right?
balance.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know where I have real problems with that is in systems where there are no GM rolls. So if you play Apocalypse World or Blaze in the Dark, the GM never rolls, ever.
But the thing is, if you take out the GM roll and now you put everything on the player, so now it's no longer, I got to hit you. You got to dodge my attack. It brings agency to the player for every single check, which I love.
I know, but at the same time, it also removes your ability to waffle, right? It's like, yeah, okay, this brute comes at you with a chainsaw. Okay, he's going to hit you for 3 harm unless you dodge. What do you roll? 2. Oh, so yeah, you didn't dodge, and what do I do about that?
I have a solution for you, but I'll have to tell you, Office Dreams is not quite ready for it, for the public eye yet.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I wonder how many GMs actually play by the book. Have you guys ever met a GM who's like strictly, the rules are the rules, that's the way it needs to be?
Yeah, they have a hard time with life.
With gaming life, for certain.
I mean, when I first, my first session with 4th edition, I thought that that's how I was going to be. And for the most part with combat, that's how I was, but with skill checks and other narrative stuff, I wasn't. And then I realized that was kind of a big no-no as I went. I modified and adjusted accordingly. So I was like, yeah, I don't want to just sit here and be a rules lawyer. That's going to suck for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, rules lawyering I think is probably my number one. If I have players who rule lawyer, I generally stop the game. I go, okay, let's pause here. My objective is to have a good time. And what you're doing eliminates that possibility for me. If we're talking about bending rules, what happens, like, for example, have you guys ever been in a situation where the next dice roll is a TPK and you think to yourself, do I really want to do that?
I feel like every character death has to have meaning, and whatever it be, even if it's the foolish death to really show everybody how evil the bad guys are, being the first death in a big thing that could be a TPK, as long as it has that meaning to build agency to everybody else at the table, that one player might be fuming that they died and first before everybody else, but that's just the way it works out. I don't know, it has to have meaning. When you're on that epic encounter at the very end of the scenario and everybody dies at the end, but they get the job done, everybody leaves the table feeling good, despite the fact that their characters are dead and obliterated.
What about you, Chris?
I would say that given my system and the way Destiny points work, I'm constantly pushing my characters to the point where I'm trying to kill them, but it's more I want them to use their Destiny point so that they can save the party. There's been a couple of times where one player has like 7 or 8 Destiny points, and I'm like, all right, well, you're using this ability and you flung this flaming thing into a giant gas tank, it's going to blow up the whole place, so let's see how that's going to play out. And they're like, okay, well, I'm going to force push myself away, and I'm going to force push everybody else into like a corner somewhere and create like a force shield around that. I'm like, okay, well, it's going to cost you this many Destiny points to do all those things. And then they somehow manage to do it, but like they don't mitigate all the damage, so then there's still enemies that are left over, and they still come in and they still come and try and kill them off. So it's an interesting system, and I think I'll probably use a modified version of Destiny points in some of my future games, but definitely not give them nearly as many as I've been told to give them based off this system.
You would really like, once again, Edge of the Empire, but they have another thing where they have light side and dark side points. Basically, the idea is they get their point, but as soon as they spend it, it gives you points to use. It's a double-sided coin. One side's white, the other side's black. So whenever they spend them, it gives you more power to do crap to them as a GM. I don't know. I find it very interesting.
Yeah.
Savage Worlds actually has a mechanic too, where have you guys played Savage Worlds before? Yeah, so Savage Worlds, there's a mechanic called the Benny mechanic, right? And what the Benny does allows you to re-roll basically anything, right? Oh, you take damage. Oh, we'll see if you can soak that. Oh, you failed your shot. We'll see if you can, whatever, you can do it. And for people who think that the Bennies are too powerful, there's actually this mechanic setting in the game that when there's a limited number of Bennies on the table, and when the players spend one, the GM gets it. And when the GM spends one, it goes back on the table to be used by the players. And let me tell you, it certainly changes how people use those points. When it's, now it's your turn.
It's like
boy.
Inspiration in 5th edition, but you're giving the GM inspiration when you use your... Wait, do I want to really pull this trigger now?
Yeah.
What's the GM going to do to us?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's fun. Yeah, I enjoy that kind of back and forth.
So let's open the kimono here. How many TPKs have you had? Can you remember?
I'm going to say 6.
How many? Wow. Okay.
I haven't had any yet. That's just because I haven't depleted their resources enough yet. But I get them really low every time. So eventually I'll get one. No, I'm not that kind of deal.
Yeah.
I'm more. Let's try to take it right to that brink, right to the edge, and then just kind of stay in that sweet spot. That's what I like to do.
I have had 5 total in my jamming career.
I would have pictured...
I'm thinking like...
Yeah, I don't know.
Really?
34 years of kicking your player's ass, 38.
38 years. So there have been a couple situations where like I've had 1 or 2 survivors, right? But almost always, I have to admit, when it comes to TPKs, I will fudge rolls if it is not a player action. So by nature, all of my TPKs have been something that has been predicated upon an action taken by one of the players. So, for example, a character who botches while trying to throw a satchel charge. It's like, oh, whoops, right? Or, characters who, they touch undead guardians in a pool full of water and they lose their torch and suddenly it's dark and
Rip that guy. Yeah.
it's like, yeah, that was him, right? Or it's like, oh no, we can totally take this guy. It's like, okay, I have given you the warnings, so you're
I guess the
welcome to
question
try.
comes down to is how many campaign ends would you say you've done in comparison to the amount of TPKs you've done?
So I've ended. As in by ending, do you mean
Yeah, as in like a
completed?
completion, that final action where that's it. Either they're done, they've retired as adventurers, or what have you.
I have brought, I think, six campaigns to completion.
6 campaigns to
Six.
completion with 5 TPKs. That's not bad odds. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. For me, more it's I don't know about you, but when you do your campaigns, do you have like a plot line from beginning to ending, or do you do yours a little bit more episodic or seasonal? Like how do you do your
Um,
campaign plotting?
I like to play off motivations a lot based on enemies and what the players are doing. I like it to end when it feels right. When it feels like the
Right.
players have no more agency, we might come back to them later, but that campaign's likely done. When their agency's done, they've completed the quest. They have nothing else on the books. Now, if the players are really into the characters, you can keep going and playing things up. Last TPK happened. Well, the players killed themselves as a sacrifice to save the world. So,
Is that a
I
TPK
guess
really?
not. I mean, but that's what I count as it. Everybody died. They saved the world, but it was a sacrifice, So it wasn't really my dice roll that killed them. I don't have very many instances where I roll a dice and everybody's like, oh, or they didn't get their save. Everybody's like, oh, crap, that's it. And I feel, that never feels good.
Have you now? You've only been jamming for 6 months, Chris. Have you finished a campaign yet?
Not technically in the sense of like
Huh.
reach like level cap, because in fourth edition the modules that I run, like the Keep on the Shadowfell, essentially that campaign is levels 1 through 3, but they have modules that will take you all the way up to level 30, and they're all linked together. So if I wanted to, I can complete each one. So I've technically completed the Keep on the Shadowfell, but I haven't gotten us all the way up to level 30, which is something I really want to do because so they have even more cool powers. But with the Star Wars campaign, I'm hoping that we'll get there. We're almost 50% of the way through all of the modules, so I'm pretty stoked that we've managed to do it for as long as we have.
What I find sometimes interesting, and I struggle with, is I have in my Merrily campaign, which is a Traveler campaign, I have a set of players, and one of the seasons that we played, they were up against an evil corporation, and they were fighting a trade war on the behalf of a smaller corporation. And it ended up with, them revealing, some really bad stuff this big corporation was doing, causing the dissolution of the corporation and all these kind of things. As well, there was like this massive space battle and a running gunfight, and it was like a really epic conclusion. And to me, I could have ended the campaign right there and said, yeah, way to go. And so what happened was I went to my players. I said, okay, so what do you guys want to do next week? It's like, well, we want to play, the Merrily. It's like, well, you guys are kind of done though. It's like, I know, but we want to keep going. It's like, and so I eventually conceded and we kind of went off and had some more adventures, and it's been a lot of fun. But I wonder sometimes if at that point I shouldn't have said, no, we're done. Like where do you draw that line?
So I guess my thing I always think about is I never want a story to be like you're going to be that god at the end of that level 20 powerhouse. I mean, that makes for an okay story, but how many times do you play a game or watch a movie where the character's like God of War, where he just goes and smashes face against everything? It's the other stories, where you see that bell curve of the character, see the progression. That's where you get the most development out of the players, out of the characters. That's like what I like to focus on. So in the case of your Travelers game, I would have probably recommended, yeah, keep playing the Travelers game, but advance things, turn their characters to NPCs. Fast forward the timeline by 20, 30 years, see where they're at now, compared to the world and how it's changed things. And that kind of brings everything back without having that feeling of like, you now own an armada of fleets and you can do whatever the heck you want, and I don't know. It's just, I feel like that adds more fun to players. For the most part, anyways.
I guess I struggle with how long to give them to enjoy those things, right? Because part of winning is enjoying the win.
But they enjoy the win every time they hear their character comes back up and they're like this rich billionaire. Their character is now embodied in the story, which you can now play up again, and again, basically, whether it's a tale of this epic death this person did to save the world or change this event, or the fact that this one guy was a greedy SOB, killed off his entire party, and now runs a casino off in the middle of nowhere. And that's just an event, and that's something that's there. And his character always can just gloat on those big neon signs in space because of what they did.
I'm having evil thoughts.
Every GM has that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think we should say I'm having
There you
GM
go.
thoughts.
I would say in regards to that kind of situation, knowing when to cut things off, most of the stuff that I've seen from like YouTubers like Matt Colville and like Guy and all those guys, they all seem to be it's all about the player, but like you as the GM, you might be getting tired of that setting, right? So like if you feel like they're done and they've completed everything, it's kind of like that delicate balance of like, well, do I want to create more content? Do I want to go out of my way to do all that extra work and make sure that they're enjoying it? Or would I maybe want to try something new and see if I can't get some or all of those players interested in it? So it's more of a, I would say if you're going to take their approach of it's all about the players, it'd be like, let's include them in the loop and be like, hey guys, I'm kind of getting a little bit tired of this for now. I'd like to try this out. Would you guys be interested? And then if it doesn't work out, we'll come back and I'll make some more stuff like that you guys are interested in.
Yeah, it's hard to do though, I think sometimes, especially when your players are like they have their characters right there. But yeah, I hear you.
I think player inclusion is very huge.
So-
Not in that, but most regards for a game. Talking to your player group, knowing what type of adventure they're into. Because how many times, I mean, you've been GMing for a long time, so there's going to be times in your past where you're like, I want to tell this story. This is the story I'm going to tell.
Mhm.
And that usually ends up biting you because the players come to there and like, I want to live this story. And you're like, and you try and curve them back to the story that you want to tell. It's like, eventually get to the point where you're like, I'm here to tell their story, not my story. And once you get to that point, I find life as a GM gets so much easier.
Well, I agree with that, but that brings me back to, cutting off the game, right? Because if they all come back to the table and they really want to play these characters,
Ask them what their motivation is, what their
to-
character is planning on doing, and then see if there's something strikes enough that there could be a story there. Otherwise, you narrate it out and say, okay, well, if your character only wants to live the rest of their life in a cafe, I mean, that's their story, and I can't really add to that.
Yeah.
But if they're like,
congratulations, you
Yeah.
own the bar.
you take,
Yeah.
you take your gold, you buy that bar, and you hire as many wenches as you want, good job. And
Yeah.
but if the players are like, you know what, I have this thing in my backstory of my long lost brother, I really want to go searching for him. I could work with that as a GM. I could be like, okay, let's have some fun with this. And the other players are like, oh, that's kind of cool, and jump in with it too. And there's enough there. Yeah, it's not too bad to create that motivation.
Yeah, cool. So you mentioned YouTubers,
Yes.
Chris. So if you were to call out one YouTuber, because I know we probably all watch or listen to more than one, who would you say you get the best advice from online?
I would say that I draw most parallels with Matt Colville on
Okay.
because I know that he plays 5th edition and he likes to use a lot of 4th edition mechanics, and I'm not a super fan of 5th edition yet because there's certain things in there that I haven't figured out quite how I would want to tweak in order to successfully run a game, because the advantage disadvantage system's like a big pet peeve of mine, and then I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to mitigate that type of thing. And then so I use a lot of his stuff. I definitely like his concept of political intrigue. So as far as narrative stuff goes, like he has a lot of really good narrative stuff that I try to rip off as much as possible. And yeah, so I would say that I draw the most parallels from him.
Rob?
See, this is my biggest
one.
pet peeve or thing is like I don't have enough time to watch YouTubers or vids. So I pop in. I love watching the odd thing. I love hop into a channel and see what's this GM doing that's cool and new. But I can't sit there and watch anything. I'm sadly the one GM that can't sit there and go like, Critical Role. I'm gonna watch that every bloody week because they're epic. They are epic. I love what they do, but I don't have that time.
What we really need is a highlights
Yeah.
reel, right, from
Yeah.
Critical Role.
Yeah.
Because I'm the same with you, right? Like, I found with Critical Role, I watched a few episodes and I'm like, I think despite the fact that these people are moderately famous, the reality is they're just like every other gaming table. They forget the rules sometimes and they get distracted or they go down rabbit holes. And you're like, how about that? It makes me feel better about my game. But my YouTuber is Seth Skorkowski. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him. He does a lot of reviews for Cyberpunk and Call of Cthulhu and stuff like that. What I love about him as a reviewer is that all of his information is incredibly practical, right? So it's like, here's this module. I ran the module. It was successful. It wasn't successful. Here's why it was successful. Here's modifications I made to make the story better, clearer, whatever. And by those examples, it helps me make my game mastering better, because I'm like, oh yeah, see, I look at you as a player, and he's funny. Like he's from Texas, and he doesn't really sound like he's from Texas, but he's Texan. Does that make sense? So, yeah, cool. Well, gentlemen, I didn't want this to go on too long, and of course we had a bunch of sound issues at the beginning, but this has been a very enjoyable conversation. So I think probably we could call it there for tonight, unless there's topics that you'd like to discuss. I'm not seeing a ton of people inside of our stream and don't have any questions. But if anybody wants to ask questions, now is your chance.
Yeah. I think this has been great. I love the idea. I love the idea of getting together and just doing some GM talk. You don't get enough of it, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, and what I like is the fact that we've been speaking now for about 35 minutes, 40 minutes, and I've gotten pearls of wisdom from both of you that I'm going to take away and help me modify my game. So that's great. That was the goal here.
Yeah, I think it was a very, very productive stream. I don't know if you want to get into the looking forward part of the session, but I would say the thing
absolutely.
that I'm looking forward to the most is, although I'm not a super fan of 5th edition, I'm hoping that they come out with a 5th edition variation on the Dark Sun campaign setting, because
Dark Sun,
probably one of my favorite 4th edition like modules that I've skimmed through, and I love the 3 Kreen praying mantis people. Like that's super cool idea, and I would love to see them come out with that, and I might actually go out and get the books for 5th edition if they were to give me that campaign setting.
There you go. Nice. Oh boy. For what's coming out recently,
I'll double, by the way. Sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I gotta say, I'll double thumbs up on Dark Sun. Dark Sun is a hoot to play. You need the right players, but yes, it's a hoot.
No, I was just trying to think of any systems that have recently come out, or I'm looking forward to that are to come out. And I'm having a hard time with it. I was looking forward to Cyberpunk, and then it came out, and I haven't actually had a chance to play it yet. Aside from that, I don't really know where I'm at for new kit systems. I haven't really looked. Hyping up my own, I guess. I'm excited for that, but I don't know if it's actually gonna be something that flies or not. I'm pretty excited about it though.
Cool. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about your system? Do you have enough to tell us?
Tell you. Basically, the idea of the game is it uses a standard deck of cards and forces on the idea of the player agency gambiting away their successes or their failures. So it's coined to the name, which is a card deck Gambit RPG, which you probably can't even read on that, but hey, it's okay. It's just basically a card matching system as far as things go, but it has infinite scope as far as how far you can take it, and really just pushes that idea of gambling. So you roll that, dice I find are so finite. As a player, I roll that dice, it's a 1. Crap, what do I do? I gotta take it. That's it. That's my only option. And it's just super finite. This is like, you are taking that double-edged sword. Every failure you get, you can say, nope, I'm gonna try and push my luck a little bit further and roll again. And end up injuring yourself more and more sometimes than what you're supposed to, but sometimes that success is worth it. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Is just kind of pushing. It builds a lot of engagement from the players, which I like.
Have you got test players yet?
I tested it a bunch. I actually started when I was camping with a bunch of friends, and I just sat there over breakfast, and it was like, boop, I got an idea. Guys, I got a deck of cards. Let's go play. Yeah, we got in trouble. We were playing till about dinner time, and the wives were not happy about that. All in all, it was pretty good.
For me, I think the number one thing I'm looking forward to. So there is a company called Fria Legia out of Sweden, and they made Mutant Year Zero, Coriolis, Forbidden Lands, and they're coming up with a new one called the Alien RPG, which actually they got the license for the movie Alien. And apparently their fear mechanism, like their stress mechanism, is quite what's the word I'm after? Unique. So as you get, so it replicates that, those people who, as they become more and more terrified, they become more and more desperate to win, and so their successes become greater, but so do their losses if they fail. So I'm actually looking forward to that. It's interesting. I find a lot of European companies have just a completely different take on how RPGs should feel when you play them. And I find that comparison between American-made RPGs and European-made RPGs super interesting. Just because I think they both sort of count storytelling in a different fashion, and so they try to replicate their type of storytelling in the game. We do have a question. So I'm a new player and I'm learning how to do it, but I don't think fast enough on my feet a lot of the times. The scenario is presented, and sometimes I'm stumped what the character would do. What are some ways you would help players who are in that situation?
You're having a hard time choosing stuff. Sometimes I recommend just grabbing a D6, assigning certain values to it. It's a very simple idea, but just a quick chart of what your character would do in a situation, fight, flee, what have you. Create an agency there, and you just roll that dice to help you out. If that way you're not relying on anybody at the table, but it's just a certain thing you can roll with your actual dice while you're there.
Okay, so just let the gods of fate decide what you're going to do.
You have your list written out based on your character, who you think they are. So you kind of get a bit of forethought, but you don't have to think on the fly.
Right. Yeah, cool. And sometimes maybe too, if you rolled fight and you're like, I just don't think my character would fight.
That's still a decision.
I think suddenly, exactly right. How about you, Chris?
Well, if it's from the player's perspective and they're trying to figure out how to narrate whatever it is that they're doing, I would definitely say tables are helpful. I know that some people have made up combat tables of oh, I do this type of hit or whatever. That's always helpful for somebody who doesn't know necessarily how best to describe their combat. As far as narrative decisions go, if they're in kind of a role-playing situation and they don't necessarily know how to respond to what the GM's character is saying to their character, I would kind of go back to the whole, what would my character do? So the more you think about your backstory and the more you immerse yourself in your own character that you've created, the easier that'll be. So if you're a lawful good paladin or whatever, right? What would be the highest possible good that your character could do in that situation if they're being tempted by an evil thing, right? Just play off of that type of thing. If you're going to go, alignment based or whatever you identify most as, I would say do that and be successful at that. Just be confidently wrong. If you feel like you're going to be wrong, just be confidently wrong all the time.
Confidently wrong. I like that. I suggest that players who are new to play, that they choose a character they know from fiction, be it movie or books or whatever, and just channel that character as their character to begin. Because, for example, if you think to yourself, I'm... what's a good example here? Who was the name of the guy from... he's Keanu Reeves plays him.
John Wick?
Okay.
John Wick. Okay, I'm John Wick. If you put yourself in that mindset, what would John Wick do? Oh, well, you kind of know what he's going to do. But that could be for something for anybody, right? You could say, I'm going to be Hermione Granger, right? What would Hermione do in this situation, right? And sometimes it's easier to kind of comprehend what the external character creation does before you internalize it for yourself. And then eventually, the character modifies itself. It's well, Hermione would do that, but I don't want to do that. This is what I want to do. And then suddenly you're your character.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Because
Right?
that's what I was going to caution about that idea of purely going off someone in fiction, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're almost pigeonholed by what they would do as his character. It's no longer you playing them; you're stuck to that character, who they are in this third world. So yeah, I think as long as they keep in mind that it is your character, your choice is final, not who they were in whatever situation they were in. I look a lot at player motivation. If you're trying to build a character and trying to have very unique interactions, just think of what their motivations in life are. And you can only have to think about a few, right? Are they trying to get rich? Are they trying to be famous? Are they just trying to get by? And you start building a few ideas like that, and you have an answer to pretty much every situation at hand.
What happens when you find your characters struggling to decide what to do next? What do you do as GMs?
I drop breadcrumbs kind of thing, or I make sure that the goal at the very beginning of the session is like very clear. So like you've been given a mission by this person.
Mm.
This is what you should be doing. And then if they're taking a long time to decide, or like, oh, let's talk to the shop people, I want to restock or whatever, but I want to try and negotiate the lowest possible price. I'm like, yeah, we're not going to do that. It's like we got a ticking clock here, so I'll whip out my timer. I'm like, you guys got this much time. The ship is leaving with or without you on it. So figure out what you guys got to do in that time.
Cool. And what? Okay, give me an example of a breadcrumb.
So since I typically run larger groups, not all of my players can come to every session, so it's kind of like a rotating party. In that situation, as long as there's one party member that was there for a previous session, like within the last 2 sessions, they might not have remembered something that they did in that session that is linked to what's going on in the current session, but I will like drop a breadcrumb that will link back to what they should remember from there that was a big thing. In this particular case, like they had engaged with an NPC previously, and now he's kind of coming back for revenge, but they didn't know that that was that particular character. But now I was like, well, you've engaged with these people before. They do seem familiar to you. Maybe you could talk to them and figure it out. And then they all of a sudden to start role playing and having that conversation and stuff like that. So I give them like tiny little things. I'm not giving them like the outright answer, but it's, getting them on to a track.
Right. Rob?
Oh man.
Characters are stymied. What do you do?
Yeah, it really depends. The problem I have often is my players tend to really fall in love with some NPCs, and then I get the tag along. So often I'll use the tag along as almost a scapegoat when they get stuck. I'm like, have you thought about this? Even playing the dumb question of them asking a question that they might not have thought about, or they don't even give the answer, just like, have we thought about that back door there, or, or even if they're thinking about that, it's like, are you sure it's safe? That's like the only thing I need to drop. Like, I'm gonna check for traps. Good call.
So, yeah, I gotcha. It's like, oh, I've got a bad feeling about this.
So I find that having those NPCs there are very useful for keeping them on track. Sometimes I find stuff like dreams can be very useful to plant a seed in a player's mind, where it's just their character. They rest for a night at the inn, and you just go, okay, everybody roll me a will save. You pick the lowest one, and you just go with that, and you give them a dream. And it might not be a vision; it's just something that you set in their mind, some narrative that they can work with.
I like that. That's good. Especially because I'm playing right now a Call of Cthulhu game, but it's a mystery, right? And so part of the mystery is having them solve it. But you're right. The dream idea, that would be fantastic for Call of Cthulhu. Yeah. What I do is I try to start with a choice. So what I do is if they're kind of stymied about what they're doing, and it's like, it could be this or it could be that. What I do is I try to move them to a narrative choice. It's like, what do you do next? Lots of conversation. Then I say, okay, so do you go to the ship dealer to see who bought the ship, or do you check out the port registry? So what I do is I eliminate all the junk choices off the table, and I just say, here's 2 choices. Which are those 2 things that you do? And generally, like if you do it once per session, like I try not to make it railroady, but what I try to do is I try to just sort of get rid of the junk off the table, right? These 2 choices, both of those choices, those are avenues that you could follow, and your characters are smart enough to figure out that all the other stuff, that's just noise. But these 2 things you might want to look at.
Yeah, I do.
So,
I do like the idea of
might be a little
the 2
heavy-handed.
choices. I typically run 3 choices because after they've explored one, they'll try another, but they'll have forgotten the third by the time that they've done both of the other things. I would maybe add an extra choice. They always like to have that, like, not as many choices, but like narrow it to like 3, and then they'll always forget about that one choice, and then you can use that to backdoor them later.
Okay, so we have time, I think, for one more question. So Mr. Pez asks, what's your favorite indie RPG that you've stolen mechanics from? Or let's just get rid of the word indie. What's your favorite RPG that you've stolen mechanics from that you use?
I'm going to jump right into the indie thing because I just did this recently. I went to Shucks in Vancouver there, and they had a bunch of RPGs out there, and one of them, there was this book called Conspire, I believe. I didn't like a lot what the guy had to say, but I loved one mechanic so much I bought the book just because I felt like I got to use this, and I feel bad if I steal this one idea and not buy your product. Um,
Yeah, I hear
so
you.
his idea was at character creation, every player writes up a conspiracy. It's the idea of their thing. Everyone writes up a conspiracy, but then they know what their conspiracy is. You take it, you shuffle it, and you deal it out to each player, and then that's their conspiracy, what they believe. So you know that there's this conspiracy out there, but not who believes it or what they're after, this goal that's out there. It creates this kind of idea of stuff, and if you get your own, then you know that no one knows my secret. But so it's kind of fun, and then of course the GM writes them all down, so he has them on hand. But yeah, it's a super neat idea. I thought, oh man, if you had like some type of spy game or anything like that, where you want to create some type of player
yeah, for sure.
inter-dialogue, great way of doing it, where you know the stuff, these rumors are out there.
Or even like a Game of Thrones type of game.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
would be amazing. And
So
yeah, for sure.
just this idea that he had in there, I read his book, like I like that. That was the main thing I took out of it. I'm like, yeah, I gotta buy this. Like I felt bad not dropping the $20 on their little book, but yeah.
Yeah. Chris?
I kind of have two. The main one that I use mostly is the Fire Emblem, the phase combat. That is probably the mechanic that I like the most. Speeds up combat way faster, and it really helps out. But since I recently ran 10 Candles, I like the idea of recording your final message. So what I'm thinking about doing when I run another D&D session is during character creation, once they have a really strong idea of who their character is, I want them to record a message that will be played upon their death to the rest of the party as their like last words, as their like dying words. And then by the time that they get to the point where their character might die off, when the character does die off, everybody will have forgotten about what they actually said, and they'll play it, and it'll be a really impactful moment for everybody, is what I'm hoping will happen.
Interesting.
Now, but wouldn't that tempt you to kill their characters just so you could hear the recording?
But I would want to make their journey before their death as epic as possible, and I would want all the characters to be like, wow, that person just went out and sacrificed themselves for me. Because like, I don't know, it's like there was that one moment in Critical Role where one of the players had used their like big spell or whatever to prevent.
Oh,
Yeah,
the wish spell.
that- so
Yeah.
he basically couldn't bring his friend back, but they got the big bad evil guy, right? So I was like, I want something like that,
Yeah.
but I feel like the voice recording could be like, wow, this is like the most intense campaign I've ever done, kind of thing for the players.
I have two. The first one's easy. It's from Savage Worlds. It uses a deck of playing cards. So with the playing card, like rather than roll for encounters, what I do is I draw cards. And on royalty, it's something, right? And if characters ask me, "Hey, is this thing here?" I'll say, "Okay, here's my playing deck. Pick a card." Right? And if you're close to the card, maybe something like it is there. But that comes from Savage Worlds. The second one that I like, which well, I guess I'm getting old because I've completely forgotten what the second one was. Really? Yeah, it's just totally gone. Wow. Okay. So, but the cards are the ones that I use them for every game that I play. So, yeah. Cool. Well, so it is now time for us to log off. But that's been a really great conversation. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys again. I think next time what we'll do is we will. I'm going to see if I'm going to post this on YouTube, and I'm going to look into the comments to see if there's anybody who actually finds something that they'd like us to discuss, and then we can discuss it at length. So to all of you people who are going to be watching this on YouTube later, this has been the GM Circle, and we have Rob, and we have Chris, and I'm Craig. We'll be on YouTube under the Rooksgate channel, and feel free to log in there and leave us any comments that you might have. And it's been great having you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You guys.